Hello, folks, and welcome to Summer Solstice, both the celebration and indeed the time period and indeed this little lecture here. Hi, my name's Al. I'm very grateful to be invited here to talk to you about this upcoming celebration. I'm actually recording this on the day or two before, depending on what calendar you even use. So this is a little bit ahead for me, but through the mysteries of time travel, you get to take this in. That's my full name, or part of my full name, at least, on that title there. My doctorate is in the history of early modern magic, and specifically where early modern magic meets the study and the history of the emotions. I sometimes gloss that as a doctorate in wizards and feelings. It means that I get to talk about a wide variety of things, from medicine to magic to religion to indeed ritual calendricals, such as here today. If you have any questions for me, or if you'd like these slides, I'll say this at the top as well as at the end, you're very welcome to email me. That is indeed my email address, because no one else has grabbed it yet, consultantsorcerer@gmail.com. We're grateful to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for taking the time to watch this if you choose to. And I wish you a very pleasant summer solstice. I want to explore some of those blessings with you over the next little bit of time we have together. So without further ado, let's crack on with that, shall we? Okay, so solstice blessings. There's a couple of things we can say about this day and indeed this kind of period of time and this kind of time of year and the kind of ritual and dare I say spiritual meaning that we can kind of, if not derive from it or find in it, then at least kind of reflect upon, right? These are save points in the year that we can kind of think about, not just the astronomical course of the sun and what the various, celestial bodies are up to, but also what our bodies are up to a little bit, So we're going to talk about it as the longest day, for indeed Midsommar is the longest day. We're going to talk about it as the flip side of Christmas, which is a quote I dug up from one folklorist talking about this, which I really liked. And so I nabbed that. You'll see the bigger quote. We're also going to talk about Midsummer Night, as well as a variety of fire festivals in general, and specifically kind of MidSummer Fires particularly. We'll talk about the burning wheel of the sun, if that doesn't sound like an amazing name of a metal album or something. We're also going to talk about what it means to quench those fires and those burning wheels. We'll talk a little bit about the tradition of herb evening, which is one of the names for Midsummer Night as well. We'll talk a tiny bit about our man John the Baptist as well, because his feast day is synonymous with Midsummer, if not actually occurring on the same calendrical day. I will talk again about Midsummer Nights, plural this time. We'll talk a little bit about the pagan and neo-pagan celebrations of Litha or Letha, one of the terms for Midsummer when we don't just call it Midsummer. And we'll also talk a tiny bit about Almond Heffen as well, the one of the Druidic terms for the Midsummer as well. So in the course of that, we'll also be examining a series of celebratory poems about the solstice. These are relatively secular. We may get a mention of God or two, or the creator, I think once or twice in there, maybe. I don't actually think we do. My point here is not to say these are the definitive poems of the solstice, so much as just opportunities, again, for us to reflect, for us to think about what they mean for us. And hopefully this is less of a serious worksheet where I hand out, solstice homework to you all to do, so much as it's an opportunity and an exploration and a celebration of the solstice and its mysteries and its magics, I guess, as well. We're not so much going to emphasize, outright spell work or casting a circle or that kind of thing. But we are going to talk about the kinds of things that you might aim that kind of spell work towards, the kinds of reflections about time, about balance, about rejuvenation, and a couple of other themes, as well as just exploring and enjoying, the heat of summer, the sweets of summer as well, and indeed, it's especially solar-y and fiery nature. So, with all that in mind, I wanted to kick off with a little bit of our man Walt Whitman in this summer invocation. All right, thou orb aloft, full dazzling, flooding with sheeny light the grey beach sand. Thou sibilant near sea, with vistas far and foam, and tawny streaks and shades and spreading blue. Before I sing the rest, O sun refulgent, my special word to thee, hear me, illustrious. Thy lover me, for always have I loved thee, even as basking babe, then happy boy alone by some wood edge, thy touching distant beams enough. Or man matured, or young, or old, as now to thee I launch my invocation. Thou canst not with thy dumbness me deceive. I know before the fitting man all nature yields. Though answering not in words, the skies, trees, hear your voice, and thou, O sun. As for thy throes, thy perturbations, sudden breaks and shafts of flame gigantic, I understand them. I know those flames, those perturbations well. Thou with that fructifying heat and light, o'er myriad forms, o'er lands and waters, north and south, o'er Mississippi's endless course, o'er Texas's grassy plains, Canada's woods, o'er all the globe that turns its face to thee, shining in space. Thou that impartially enfoldest all, not only continents, seas, thou that to grapes and weeds and little wild flowers givest so liberally, shed thyself on mine and me, mellow these lines, fuse thyself here with but a fleeting ray out of thy million millions. Strike through this chant. Not only launch thy subtle dazzle and thy strength for this, prepare the later afternoon of me myself, prepare my lengthening shadows, prepare my starry nights. So along with starting with an invocation, I wanted to start with some key themes here around summer and what we do in summer, how we try and enjoy summer. The beach is going to crop up a lot, the place where the hot sand meets the cooling sea, and this place where not only fire but water meets the fire to quench it, to cool it, to flow with it. Also, this concept of even at the height of summer, this sense of the passing of time that's going on, this idea of prepare for me, the starry nights. I'm going to talk about some starry nights as well, I assure you, and things we do in the evenings as well as the days, those solstice nights, those summer nights, those midsummer nights, and their dreams. So we call this the longest day, and I don't want to solstice explain to you too much, but if you're taking this course, it's worth us always looking at another diagram or two. This is very much the sun's zenith, at least in the sense that it is at least mythologically, if not astronomically, certainly astrologically, at a kind of height of sorts, right? Now, solstice also means like the period where the sun stands still. That's how we translate that, right? So it's a moment to pause, to reflect as well, all right? And it's worth us thinking about the fact that the summer solstice is indeed the sun at its height, right? We see it higher than it is at the equinox, or indeed certainly at the midwinter solstice point, right? The shortest day. This is the longest day, and it literally takes the sun. The sun goes the highest in the sky for it and comes down the longest, right? Highest in the sky relative to us on Earth as we look at it, right? It's also, we'll note here, as of any zenith, downhill from here, not to sound too grim about it, but that's kind of the case. Not only is this a point where the sun is at its height and it kind of lingers there for a minute, it pauses to reflect, it's also the point where from here the days will start to get shorter again until we hit midwinter, where we'll hit the shortest day of the year, and then the days will start to lengthen again and the sun will start to creep and return. And we see this played out mythologically, and we'll talk about this a little bit today, as the interplay between the Oak King and the Holly King. We'll see that very mythologically played out in very folky kind of folklores. But it's also worth us thinking about what it means to be at a point midway through a thing, through an endeavor, through a life, and what it means to think about not experiencing our strength leaving us, as in winter. We talked a fair bit about those in the bleak midwinter, right? So much as it is preparing to prepare for, right? We still have the zenith. We still have the point of strength, of celebration. Those memories have not yet faded. They're still bright and fresh on the palate. You know, we're still enjoying the lollipops and things of summer, but we have that sense that like this too shall pass, right? In the meantime, though, we also get to enjoy not just the confectionery, but also the greening and the verdancy of nature, right? And again, we'll see that in that flip side of Christmas thing. There's no white, no leafless boughs, no skeletal branches of winter. No. This is full, teeming with life and this green, vivacious sense of life, not just returning as in spring, but returned in full throw, right? In full force. It's also a period, as is often the case in these kinds of like stations of the sun, that it is considered a point where the worlds, or the veils between worlds, which we normally talk about the veil between worlds as between the living and the dead, but between the humans and the not human spirits, that the worlds, like this is a point of liminality, that the veil wears thin on midsummer, and there's a period where not only beautiful nature spirits or faerie can come forth, but also tricksters, sprites, goblins, and all sorts of things that go bump in the night. As a result of all that, and along with the fact that, you know, this is also a period where, historically at least, disease could spread particularly rapidly among cattle, that we would, that this becomes a time of fires, and specifically a time of fires not to warm us so much as to protect us. Fires to bless, fires to protect, fires to ward off. Yeah, we'll look at some particularly specific fire traditions and festivals in the course of the rest of this little chat. So here's a quote from one folklorist. And again, I haven't really attached too many names to these, because my point is not to say this is the definitive statement on this thing, so much as just to give you examples of the way people talk about this stuff. Again, you know, when we're talking about folklore, folk magic, and so on, it can be more useful to think about what folk say about it than it is to try and find a definitive authority. Sometimes there are, and sometimes that, you know, that myth about this period of time is just not true. However, more often than not, most things get rolled up into a big ball of the kinds of things we tell each other at this time of year, the kinds of discussions and debates we have. We'll see that Litha, for instance, has some contention to it as a festival at all, from both a historical angle and a kind of like practical one. But all I mean to say is that we have the chance to look at several different voices speaking about these kinds of traditions and things. And I've tried to gather them together and kind of shuffle them up at random, so we don't necessarily fall back on our favorite anthropologist or historian. We get to kind of enjoy a general hubbub of what's said about these kinds of things. So this flip side of Christmas is fun to me. This summer solstice here, and we'll talk a little bit about the green man as well, and how he crops up. But this is kind of like an opposite Christmas, right? We still have a nice jolly bearded avuncular figure here, but in this case, he's made of hops and barley, I guess, rather than Santa. The summer solstice, around which the Midsummer Festival was celebrated, the evening night of June 23rd and the day of 24th, again, it's links to St. John's Eve, is the flip side of the winter solstice and Christmas. The sun was at its height, the day was at its longest, the season was warm, the vegetation was full and still green, and indeed is, right? I don't know whether they're framing this in the past tense. The season seemed magical. It does. But this time also marks the beginning of the slow and inevitable weakening of the sun over the next half year. According to James Fraser and Robert Graves, in the mythology of ancient Britain, the Oak King ruled when the sun was waxing, while the Holly King, who ruled over the waning sun, began his rule on the summer solstice, the Oak King withdrawing to the circumpolar stars, which never disappear below the horizon, even in winter. So we have these asterisms, we have these star laws that start to play out in the course of the sun's movement. It's not just about the zodiac, it's not just about fixed stars either. There's a good sense of these circumpolar stars. All right. So there is a sense that a lot of summer poems can be, I don't want to say cheesy, but there's a sense of like embracing the corniness a tiny bit of like, it's hot and you're gonna have an ice cream, and there is a, I don't want to say that it has to be corny because obviously that's a very subjective statement, but there is a sense I feel of the saccharine in summer, and maybe that's just my natural kind of English distrust of the burning eye of sun that we never really get to see in our rainy lands. But I wanted to give this opportunity to explore what it is and to get at the sense of like nostalgia and of childhood, as well as standing there at a vantage point to see what childhood is like for someone else. This is John Updike's June. The sun is rich and gladly pays in golden hours, silver days, and long green weeks that never end. School's out, and time is ours to spend. There's Little League, hopscotch, the creek, and after supper, hide and seek. The livelong light is like a dream, and freckles come like flies to cream. And there's a little bit of a hint at the end there of like, and things end, right? Again, when we get that, right? This is great and we should enjoy it because it won't be around forever, right? I want ice cream now. So let's talk about those fire festivals a little bit. What do we do about those flies that come? The main Midsommar Eve rituals centered around fires, which had a private household side and a communal village side. In both cases, the idea was that the fire, smoke, and ashes would purify the environment, driving away evil spirits and protecting homes, families, livestock, and crops. At home, farmers would light one or more fires at one or more locations where the smoke would drift over the crops in their fields, where the livestock were also temporarily pastured so as to receive the same benefit. Farmers might also drive the cattle through the smoke next to the fires or between fires, between two fires, or over their embers or ashes, and also singe the cattle and horses with burning branches or torches. After that, farmers with their families would head off to the large communal midsummer bonfire of the village. So here we're distinguishing different kinds of bonfires in some places. Now, in many villages, this has ended up being something that's kind of combined to an extent, that we have one bonfire and we might drive some cattle through it, and then we'll stay there for the rest of it. Most of the time, it's still two separate ones. In my experience, at least, it's going to depend on what fire festival you're going to, and that kind of thing. And again, fire is what happens at dusk, typically, and indeed maybe even later than that, at least the communal one. And so, with the passing of day into night, we get stars. And of course, I'm going to read Carl Sandburg's Summer Stars. Bend low, again, night of summer stars. So near are you, sky of summer stars. So near, a long arm man can pick off stars, pick off what he wants in the sky bowl. So near you are, summer stars. So near, strumming, strumming, so lazy and hum strumming. And I like those kinds of poems that kind of speak for themselves and that give that sense of the movement, the twinkle of the stars as a hum or as a strumming of some kind, strumming their own light, strumming ours, the sense of the fingers waving in the breeze of night and the ripples of the sky, you know. Worth us looking up. So let's speak a little more about that communal good fire. The communal bonfire was lit at nightfall, which at that time in Northern Europe was quite late in the evening. It had a dual role. One was that of purifying the local environment from evil spirits and disease, an ancient tradition that went back at least to Rome, where their procedure was recommended by Pliny the Elder, no less authority than. The second purpose was to stimulate the now waning sun to remain as strong as possible through the rest of the growing and pasturing season, which was a ritual of sympathetic magic, since the fire was looked upon as a miniature version of the sun. Now, this is not necessarily a super popular idea always, and certainly how it's framed is very Fraserian, is very indebted to Fraser and the Golden Bough, this idea of this kind of sympathetic magic. That's not to say it's not necessarily the case, or that one couldn't have a bonfire to try and inspire the sun to return again one day. These things can all be true. Just need us to understand that, like, this is what folks say about this, and there's a reason I'm not quoting this as a definitively accurate statement, because this is one of many ideas about how we can celebrate the sun and what it means to celebrate the summer solstice. Part of the ritual involved jumping over the fire several times. Repetition is important in magic, and both forward and backwards, which imitated the sun oscillating through the seasons. The leapers thus secured protection and good fortune for themselves. When the flames were still rather high, the leapers were the strapping youths of the village, competing with one another. As the flames died down, women and couples also did it to secure a good marriage, ensure that they would have children, and so on. So this is kind of linked to jumping the broom as well. We see kind of linked here. And we'll see again that hand fasting and other kind of like nuptial ceremonies are also kind of common at this time. It's nice to be outside. Why wouldn't you? You know, there's a practicality to all of this stuff as well. I want to point out that, you know, there are definitely traditions of strapping women and non-mask peoples also jumping over the fire. I don't think it's exclusively a boys' club, although depending on what tradition and village and whatnot, then it might be more about the young men doing it at certain points than it wasn't. Also, yeah, repetition is important in magic. Repetition is important in magic. Yeah. So we see that this isn't just something that an individual farmer would do for their individual crops. This is something that requires people coming together as a community, that it takes a village, you know, to celebrate a solstice. So here's a little more on MidSummer Fires specifically, and a little more about their magic or spirituality, if we prefer, or their mysticism, right? In Ireland, it's said that the MidSummer Fires were lit at sunset after being sprinkled with holy water. So it's important that they go up at sunset, right, and not before. In Ireland and Scotland, bonfires were lit in memory of the boughs fires, a name derived from either the Celtic sun god Bel, which usually is translated as bright, the bright one, or the Saxon word Baal, which also just means fire, right? So these bonfires were believed to boost the ebbing power of this life-giving, mysterious soul of fire. In Irish folklore, fairies took the form of whirlwinds to try and extinguish these powerful bale fires, but throwing burning wood in their direction usually discouraged them. I mean, it discourages me when people throw burning wood at me, so it's not an unreasonable supposition that would also upset some trickster fairies. So here we see the start of, like, it's a time to prepare for protection and protecting oneself from the various ministrations of spirits, not just the wicked demons that try and destroy us and our cattle, but also just the little mischievous and annoying things, you know, the equivalent of the mice getting in the grain and things like that, as well as, you know, the devil lurking around the woods, right? We see here that there's potential to understand the minor distractions, delays, and frustrations, as well as the huge hulking, you know, evils that lurk in the heart of man and round the corner at the dark forest, you know. So again, what do we illuminate, and how do we prepare for the world to try and, you know, for various parts of the world to get in the way? You know, how do we practice that forbearance? How do we practice that stability? How do we practice that patience? Children joined hands and leapt through the embers to symbolize the growth of corn and harvest abundance. Here we see another writer speaking about what this represented. You'll see commonly that, like, people don't generally tend to tell you why they're jumping through the fire. It's that this is the time of year to jump through the fire. And it can mean any number of things, from leaving old things behind to, yeah, exactly, growing tall and strong like the corn, right? Leaving childish things behind, even to a certain extent, while still getting to practice something a little bit childish by playing hopscotch over a fire, right? As well as protection from evil, protection from disease, protection from trickster spirits, as well as, you know, paying homage to the sun. Many reasons, right? Many reasons to do that, along with, you know, finding a sweetie, its own rite of passage, you know, to many traditions. So farmers drove animals through the ashes to protect them from disease, as we've seen. On the Isle of Man, blazing furze was carried around cattle for the same purpose. In Cornwall, the MidSummer Fire was lit by the Lady of the Flowers, who cast flowers into the flames. Cornish elders could then predict futures by reading the fire. Interesting. So again, we don't just look ahead to, oh, in 6 months it will be midwinter and the sun will be gone. We're not just looking at it as like, oh God, things are going to get worse now. It's also a sense of literally looking forward, right? Of foretelling, of understanding that based on what's occurring now, this is what's likely to occur then, right? So we're also planning, not just commiserating for the passage of time. I think that's important as well. So the burning wheel of the sun is one particular motif that we find. Now, of course, those of you familiar with any kind of Wiccan or other pagan kind of practice will be aware of like the wheel of the year, which frames the sun as a wheel already, going around hitting all of those 8 Sabbats. Aletha having just done Beltaine on the 1st of May with all of its maypoles and so on. Right, also faerie, right, very, very similar kinds of things going on there. Here we see a little bit of origins to this idea of not just the sun itself being a wheel, but the sun at midsummer, arguably the solariest of these solar festivals, is itself symbolized by a wheel that was sometimes set on fire and indeed rolled down a hill. So a 17th century poet, now Georgius, explained at Midsommar that special straw-covered wheels were set on fire and rolled down a mountain so that it appeared if the sun had fallen from the sky and was rolling along the horizon, and in so doing, taking all the bad luck, especially if they plunged into water at the bottom. So here we have this idea of not just the bonfire representing the fire of the sun, being like, hey, here's a little boost for you. Like, hey, we love your work, right? A little cargo cult sun. No, we're also talking about the sun literally coming down from the sky, like this being the sense of trying to quench the sun, right? And that the sun takes with it bad things as it goes, as it leaves the sky, right? It's quenched in waters. Again, the meeting of fire and water here, interestingly, so that it can continue on, right? It stops so it can keep going. All right. I think that's a lesson for many of us who might struggle with a work-life balance, for instance, right? Your body will find a way to stop somehow. The sun will find a way to stop somehow. And then it's a case of whether or not it starts up again, or if it's been driven too hard and the axles are burned through. So this wheel rolling represented the beginning of the sun's declination, as we've kind of talked about here. We're at that zenith, and now the days are going to get shorter again. Right? This practice dated back to the 4th century. We've been doing this for a fair old while, recorded as a ritual followed by the pagan community of Aquitaine in France. Similar rituals were described around 530 Common Era by a British monk in Gloucestershire. And Christians then transferred the tradition to the 24th of June and rededicated it to St. John the Baptist. And again, emphasized those quenching elements, right? John the Baptist being he who saved by water, right? As well as having all sorts of watery mysteries of his own. So speaking of watery mysteries, let's take a chance to celebrate the other kind of quenching that can happen in summer, that is summer rains. So here's this poem by Raymond A. Foss. A break in the heat, away from the front. No thunder, no lightning, just rain, warm rain, falling near dusk, falling on eager ground, steaming blacktop, hungry plants, thirsty, turning toward the clouds, cooling, soothing rain, splashing in sudden puddles, catching in open screens, that certain smell of summer rain. I like that one, and I hope you do too. So these quenching waters can come in a variety of accidental, sprinkles and showers, as much as they are about jumping into a lake or a river on a hot day, which I can also recommend, assuming you are being safe. So speaking of quenching, worth us thinking about what's happening with this wheel. So on the one hand, we have the idea that it's taking away the bad things, that a wheel like an eye is kind of attracting the evil eye, we might even say. There's some parallel there with the Nazar, those blue and white and dark blue or black evil eye charms, right? Anti-evil eye, wards of the Malocchio, right? We can also see that there's potentially other things going on here. Another solar fire ritual was to roll a flaming wheel down a hill, says someone else, and into a river or lake at the bottom, if there was one. The wheel symbolized the wheel circle of the seasons, which we just talked about, right? As well as the sun disk. The sun was a wheel is an ancient symbol, often depicted in the form of a wheeled chariot being driven across the sky. In this ritual, the wheel was stuffed with straw or hay, the yellowish color of which resembled the sun, as well as just being flammable, right? Again, practical and aesthetic, why not both, right? So that the wheel itself was barely visible. And in many cases, an axle protruded a meter or so to each side, which people used to guide it down the hill. So far from this idea of just like letting the thing go and it just like, you know, spreading its rampage over hundreds of potentially fiery miles, there's this idea that actually rolling it down the hill might have been a little more of a careful affair than we give credit for, which I think is worth bearing in mind. The idea was for it to roll all the way to the bottom into the water, if any. If it did not roll all the way down, the harvest would be bad. And that's a common thing, that like if the wheel falls over. And here we get this idea of folk magic being, on the one hand, this is kind of a presage, right? It's kind of a divining device, right? We set the wheel on fire, we let it go, and if it gets all the way to the bottom, the harvest will be good. If it doesn't, then that's bad. That's an indicator, right? But again, with the sense of sympathetic magic, an indicator is itself an image of the thing, right? If you interpret the wheel falling over before it gets to the end as an image of failure, you've kind of invited that failure by letting that course of events happen. All right. Hence, again, why don't we guide it down with careful axles, like with people holding onto it to make sure it definitely goes into the water. That way we can ensure that the thing doesn't happen. This interplay here can often, to a scientific mind, feel like cheating. And to an extent it is, but you are also conducting the ritual and showing the sun what you want to happen, showing the harvest what you want to happen, as well as fudging the results, or like flipping a card over until you get the one you want, right? I think it's more like acknowledging that this is representative ritual, that this is indicative, and that this is linked in some way to the mysteries you are trying to explore and celebrate and strengthen, as it is just, oh, well, you know, we'll pretend it didn't do that. You know, this isn't a pretend. This is ensuring the thing that needs to happen happens, right? I think that's worth bearing in mind about an awful lot of folk magics. This interplay of presage and an omen, and ensuring through what often doesn't look like particularly operative spellcraft, but instead looks more like a real practical sense of ensuring that the thing happens, ensuring it happens. So here's another poem, again set in a beach, again of midsummer, again speaking of a river as well, and in this case also speaking of the future in the last couple lines as well. Broad sun-stoned beaches, white heat, a green river, a bridge, scorched yellow palms, from the summer sleeping house, drowsing through August. Days I have held, days I have lost, days that outgrow like daughters, my harboring arms. And there, I think, is probably the first explicit theme of kids and of being a parent and of standing still at the midpoint of life, of the sun and of the year, to think about what it means to be starting and to be thinking about what it means to be ending, you know, to be able to see both the beginning and the ending of the road, and also the road as it unfolds away, and having a sense of the passage of time. Big mysteries beyond just having an ice cream. Not that having an ice cream isn't itself a mystery. So one of the other themes around not just celebrating or protecting, but of gathering things to work helpfully in the rest of the course of the year, especially as the sun's strength is now declining, is again to grab at that save point of the sun's power, of its zenith here. And how do we grab at that save point? Well, one of the ways we can do that is with the flowers that have themselves been nurtured by that sun, that we can gather, and we can dry, we can store, we can otherwise process or prepare our medicines and our natural materia. So the strength of the sun on Midsummer's Day was believed to imbue plants with healing qualities. Women gathered herbs for healing potions for the whole year. So this was your time to get ingredients that you use for the rest of the year, right? Until herb evening came round again. So not just that 6 months, but the whole 12 months, right? Magical fern seeds are often talked about specifically, only seen on Midsommar Eve, and would grant the power of invisibility. And this is an interesting one, that the sun rules the dazzling light that illuminates things, that scares away the diseases and the little gnats and the pests and the little spirit and the trickster spirits and the little goblins in the night. It does all that stuff, but it also dazzles and also potentially blinds. All right, and so the sun also rules invisibility, like the light and its absence thereof. Right. It's something of a debate about which species of ferns actually have seeds and which don't. Some just fully don't have seeds, and so this idea that, like, oh, ferns only seed once a year is kind of like once in a blue moon. It's an analogous for a never happened, right, or an impossible thing that you might find. Then again, if you wandering around in a forest and find something ferny that has seeds, maybe that's exactly what you're after, right? So people also bathed in and drank the healing waters of lakes that captured midsummer sunshine for health and good fortune. Again, this idea that, like, water is as receptive as the blood of plants, that water inside them, or that green blood of plants, right? One particular plant, again associated with our man St. John the Baptist, is St. John's wort, which is thought to ward off evil spirits and could in legend move by itself to avoid being picked. All right, this is also part of its a set of legends around solary plants, the plants literally called heliotropes, that which moves with the sun, or sun mover, literally, right, or sun turner, trope, right? And this refers to the idea that it might move in the course of, like, following the sun for the day. But a variety of other things would also be called that. And a variety of other plants that were just solary were considered to turn with the sun, right? To be turned by the sun is the other option here, right? On the Isle of Man, if it's trodden on Midsummer, that's St. John's Day, a faerie would lift you up and lead you astray until the first rays of the next morning's sun. So here we have this idea that the morning sun, the dawn is not the only thing that breaks, the dawn itself breaks curses or breaks the hold of mischievous or wicked spirits over us in some sense, that it returns us to our senses in some way, that it dispels the glamour of a Midsummer Night's Dream, for instance. Midsummer Eve was also known as Herb Evening because it was thought to be the most potent night of the year for gathering herbs, especially St. John's wort. It was named after St. John because it blooms around that time. All right, so here is literally a mystery of time, right? It's also kind of yellow, interestingly, so it's solary. It's also sometimes called woundwort, just occasionally. It has perforations in it, and is said to be very good at dealing with, when you are perforated in some way, when you've got a wound. It's also, there's some contemporary studies on St. John's wort being used in extract form in antidepressant regimens, can be found to be somewhat helpful in a short-term basis for things like depression, anxiety, and other kinds of conditions like that. And again, tests are very early, and it's in no way a cure-all. But it's interesting that this solary thing that brings blessings and balms and benedictions and so on is also explicitly used at chasing away the demons of the mind and the heart, right, as well as of the woods and the vale. It was thought to keep demons at bay and to disempower witches. St. John's wort is absolutely used to keep away evil spirits and evil spells, right, of various sorts, and of bad humours, right, both of ourselves and that which we might pick up from others. St. John himself was thought to be a protector against witches as well. One poem ran, "St. John's wort doth charm all witches away, if gathered at midnight on the saint's holy day. Any devils and witches have no power to harm those that gather the plant for a charm." All right, so we have this notion here of you know, and witches here is not referring to your, you know, your local coven of lovely Wiccan friends. This is a technical historical term outside of, you know, really important feminist reclaimings of power and so on, that on the whole, a witch in this context was the same, you know, was one who sent evil spirits after you, or one who did witchcraft in the sense of, not in the sense of like empowered sorcery of my own, but the magic that harms others, maleficia, right? So this is the historical definition of that kind of witchcraft, right? In the same way that, you know, to call someone a thief who steals, or a murderer who murders, right, is derogatory, but it's also like a term that refers to a specific set of things they do, right? We need to frame early modern witchcraft in those kinds of lenses a lot of the time. So hopefully, you know, we can do our counter witching, our counter magics by observing not just St. John's wort, but of gathering other plants that might be helpful around this time. So it's worth us thinking about a couple things that are brought up here: our engagement with the greening, what that means to ward away that which would do us harm, just as the sun itself is about to start going into its retreating into its decline, right? It also may take things away for us. We have John the Baptist coming in here, who, as we'll talk about in a second, is also tied to nature in some very particular ways. He was regarded as a wild man, as well as presaging the coming of Jebus, right? Of the Nazarene Christmas as well, seeing again that summer is once more the flip, you know, midsummer is the flip side of Christmas. So for the time being, however, I just want us to think about how these plants have taken in these qualities of healing from the summer sun. That's why we do it at night, not because night is particularly good for gathering, but because it means that they've had the whole of the day to soak as much of that good energy as they can. And it made me think of this poem by Laurie Lee, Apples. I had a friend when I was at big school doing my doctorate who made cider with his dad. And his dad had made cider with his dad, and back and back and back. I went to Bristol, which is big cider country. And one of the things that always struck me is that the ciders, regardless of what different techniques they used, like what different recipes, what different proportions of sugar and whatever else was put in there, were always slightly different because the weather was always slightly different. And I remember Richard telling me that, and just reminding me that, you know, apples turn the light into sugar, right? This is why Galileo says wine is sunlight held together with water. These grapes have absorbed all of this stuff as batteries, and they've turned that light into these sugars of various like complexities and sorts, these fructoses, and that itself has been made into wine, right? So these apples are themselves a crystallization of memory of sorts. And it's worth us thinking about the way that it's not just exposure to light, but heat and healing properties from those things that's what we're doing when we're harvesting anything, regardless of whether or not it's with a golden sickle and finding those secret fern seeds at midnight on St. John's Eve, or if it's, you know, just picking some rosemary from our garden for, you know, some nice potatoes or something, right? Behold, the apple's rounded worlds, juice green in July rain, the black pole star of flowers, the rind mapped with its crimson stain, the russet, the crab, and cottage red burn to the sun's hot brass, then drop like sweat from every branch and bubble in the glass. They lie as wanton as they fall, and where they fall and break, the stallion clamps his crunching jaws, the starling stabs his beak. In each plump gourd, the cidery bite of boy's teeth tears the skin. The waltzing wasp consumes his share. The bent worm enters in. I, with as easy hunger, take entire my season's dole. Welcome the ripe, the sweet, the sour, the hollow, and the whole. I like this idea that as you know, again, I don't want to poem explain, but I like this notion that we take all that nature has to give us, not in the sense of greedily taking, but we are open to all experiences, and that these memories, the memories that are hollow, the things that come back to us that are sourer than we might like, right? Also have things to teach us and are worth celebrating sometimes as well. You know, I don't know. Maybe that's just pulling one daft theme out of something that's far bigger and strums all sorts of other ideas for you. But I think this idea of apples and of the apples of July, as it specifies here, but of this whole summer season, is interesting and worth us thinking about what we're growing, when we're harvesting it, and what we put into it, what was put into it, and what and again, these mysteries of time, right? Of considering memory and of how things have sweetened or soured in time, right? Worth us pondering on. So, obvious ways that we see herb evening and things like that played out over summer are the Green Man, and there's various celebrations. These are so myriad, and the myth of the Green Man is a lie. There are so many different versions of this figure. Sometimes it's literally just something that is built. My mom collects these, for instance, so I love looking out for them and buying other ones, and they poke out from the garden in various ways. She thinks of them sometimes as protecting the garden, someone to have a little chat to while she's watering it sometimes as well. But you know, I wouldn't say she had a developed cultus of the Green Man as a patron deity that she goes to. It's a guy that exists, and you know, we pay homage to sometimes, but we don't, you know, don't spoil him too much. This statue here is, or this assemblage here is actually huge, and is from a festival literally called Green Man Festival, which again is a very particular festival in the UK, more of a music thing and youth culture than a pagan pride thing. Although they're also very proud of their green men that they build every year. And this is just itself one of the celebrations that the Green Man is generally said at this time of year, when it's a little separated from the Jack and the Green that we get more at the May and at Beltaine, although still maybe a little bit related to that, is less even about, the Jack and the Green is often about fertility, for instance. But the Green Man is all the greening mysteries, and is a face put on them that you can address in a variety of ways. Now, one should probably be respectful if you're going to look for the Green Man in the forest or in the green, right, in the wilds. But this is a very ecumenical kind of figure. And yes, it might be related to the great god, who is the consort of the great goddess of Mother Nature herself. So it could be framed as like Father Nature or Brother Nature, if we want to put it like that. And sometimes it is in some ritual. But the very plasticity, the very dynamism, the very fact that the Green Man can play a number of roles for people is, I genuinely think, one of the strengths of this kind of spirit and the way it's celebrated at this time of year, right? That he's teeming, that things look very green, and that this is a great time to talk to the green in a man shape, in the shape of a man, right? The green that walks like a man, right? The other way that this kind of herb evening and these greening mysteries gets personified in some ways, or a human face is put on it, is indeed with John the Baptist. But before we get to that, let's talk about some fairies, because that's the other key theme here, right? The Midsummer Night's Dream. This is an image of Hermia and Lysander, for instance, in the more kind of like farcical will they, won't they of these couples and their not star-crossed love so much as twilight, briefly muddled love. There we go. There's a new term for it. So this is read as a poem. It's literally from Midsummer Night's Dream, right? So it has a stage directions here. A wood near Athens, a fairy speaks. Over hill, over dale, through bush, through briar, over park, over pale, through flood, through fire. I do wander everywhere, swifter than the moon's sphere, and I serve the fairy queen, to dew her orbs upon the green. The cowslips tall her pensioners be, in those gold coats spots you see. Those be rubies, fairy favors. in those freckles live their savors. I must go seek some dewdrops here, and hang a pearl in every cowslip's ear. Farewell, thou lobe of spirits, I'll be gone. Our queen and all her elves come here anon. So there's a couple things about this. Again, I don't want to get too English lit about this. Obviously, this is literally like announcing that a bunch of other fairies and their queen are about to turn up. There's also this notion of like, I'm the one putting the dew in the plants, in the cowslips, that's hung like an earring. That's really beautiful, right? Beautifying these plants. The freckles and the spots here may well again refer to the perforations of St. John's wort, right? We may literally be talking about that at this point. And again, if you start to look at Shakespeare's flower language, he's very poetic, but he's also talking about actual flowers all of the time, right? And particular things that those flowers do that might seem very fanciful, and then you look at it and you're like, oh, you do have perforations, you do have little freckles, huh? How about that? Yeah. So, of course, hopefully, having if you read or watched a version of Midsummer Night's Dream, you also see that this as much kind of hopefully advises us against cavorting too much with fairies, and certainly getting involved in the intrigue and politics of fairy court between king and queen and what have you. That way, will make an ass of us, so to speak. But hopefully we see that this is also part of these kinds of celebrations of this year. And we see that especially across the various different things that we might consider fairy cults across Eastern Europe, across the Balkans. Distinct traditions worked with in different ways at this time of year, usually with water and light or fire of some kind. But yeah, start to see that there's an engagement with the other folk, with the good neighbors. So I've teased about John the Baptist. Let's talk a little more. It's worth us bearing in mind, and sometimes when you see these paintings and you're like, oh, he's wearing clothes like from old times, like old Jesus times, right? The point here is that even for that period, he is regarded as being like a wild man. He's with his camel hair shirt, for instance, it was said. But he's a man of the woods, a man of the deserts, a man of the wilds, right? He's wearing animal skins. He is like a noble savage. That horrible term that gets applied by people with my accent over the last couple hundred years in order to push empire, for instance. Now, obviously, there are features of John the Baptist, if we're not terribly steeped in the Christian hagiography of this, that he announces Jesus. He's the one that baptizes Jesus and says, hey, there's someone coming who's even going to be even more important than me. He himself is announced as well by the Archangel Gabriel as is Jesus. And he blesses with water, just as Jesus was set, and is contrasted sometimes with Jesus blessing with the fire of the Holy Spirit, right? Now, there are other mysteries. We're going to talk about, the solar year and about decline. That John the Baptist is eventually himself beheaded and has that whole interplay of dances and veils with Salome and his severed head, potentially speaking glossolalia and various, apocryphas and things like that. But the main thing we want to bear in mind is that he's invoked in midsummer rites and sites of gathering plants and sacred materia, because he is the wild man. He is the Baptist who makes things sacred through their waters and through their dews, right? He's just very tied to that kind of stuff for this time of year and these times of day and night. And he rules some very specific plants like St. John's wort, which is also said to be particularly good at chasing away witches and disease and depression, and flowers at this time of year. So we'd talk about Midsummer Nights, and here's a very, very famous picture. It was sometimes said, I have seen it said that it was said, right? I've not found an ancient who literally says this. I've not found it written in some old book, but I have found a lot of moderns quoting this, saying that the ancients said, the bird of day is weary and has fallen into the sea, is supposedly the kind of like reflection that was said as the midsummer sun finally set, right? On Midsommar Eve, it was said, according to an anonymous 1723 account, the air is infectious with devils, spirits, ghosts, and hobgoblins. But do not worry, for when you wake, bright Phobos will shine on you again for all of your days. All right, so, and between that, we still have the moon to guide us as well through that dark. So if we have good relations with the moon and its spirits, then we're also hopefully doing okay through the dark of the of the blind spot of the sun, if we like. Even at its height, it has to turn around and go to bed at some point, right? What happens behind the sun's back is a question for Midsommar Eve, right? And is where the tricks happen, is where we think we've fallen in love with someone else, but really it's just some fairy that's put something in our eyes, right? These kinds of things, the mysteries of the heart also tied to the sun and how it turns over the course of the year is worth reflecting on here perhaps as well. Along with being worried about, goblins, which is, don't be overly worried about goblins, but it's, there is always a non-zero possibility of goblins messing with you, right? So hopefully we that's why we have our ducks in a row, we have our wards clean, we have our St. John's wort hanging, etc. Right? So speaking of Midsummer Night, let's enjoy some of Emily Bronte's words on the summer moonlight. "'Tis the moonlight, summer moonlight, all soft and still and fair. The solemn hour of midnight breathes sweet thoughts everywhere. But most where trees are sending their breezy boughs on high, or stooping low are lending a shelter from the sky. And there in those wild bowers, a lovely form is laid, green grass and dew-steeped flowers wave gently round her head." And this is called, the painting itself is a Thompson. I think it's Hot Summer Moonlight as well. Really, really good combination of colors there, I think. Yeah, wanted to share that with you. So for many pagans and neo-pagans, the midsummer is called Letho or Letha. It's a celebration of midsummer itself. It explores a lot of these, all of these themes we've already kind of touched upon here just a little bit, right? It's also considered a little contentious. There are some more historically inclined practitioners and celebrants who don't really see much evidence of people celebrating midsummer beyond marking it as being aware that it happened. And the idea of being careful that we don't pretend that, oh, this is an ancient solar festival of fire and we are doing the same thing that our ancestors of thousands of years have done, when in fact we're kind of maybe making some more of those things up than we think we are, right? Not there's anything wrong with new ritual, right? New ways of celebrating things, but we should try and come from a place of honesty, I think, especially when we're attempting to commune with nature and to look inside ourselves and to stand with our families and our chosen families and our kin and our friends in circle to dance around a bonfire, right? It's important that we know why we're there and that we aren't kind of deluding ourselves in some sense. So some people argue that Letha shouldn't really be called a real thing. It's like Mabon a little bit, but not quite as contentious. What I will say is that regardless of where you fall in terms of like how authentic it is to celebrate it as an ancient festival, it's still regarded as an especially solary festival. I mean, obviously it's solary because it's about what the sun's doing, as are all of these festivals, but it's the one that's like especially because it's summer and it's the sun being the most sun-like in that sense, right? The other things that we find particular about it, and hence this picture, is that there seems a particular emphasis on Letha in marriage. We don't quite see that as much for Beltaine or the May, although that we do get that a little bit. We get as many garlands, we get more ribbons, arguably, in the May and in Beltaine. We still get ribbons around midsummer. Like, ribbons is just what you do to celebrate. We don't have them plaited or tied around people's wrists as much as we do at the midsummer. Again, partly I think this is just a practical thing, that it's nice to be outside, and so why wouldn't you want to be outside, and why wouldn't you want to have like a barn dance or something? And if you're going to have people dancing, might as well have a reason to celebrate, like two or more people's love, right? There is a sense historically that the midsummer was a particular festival dedicated to Juno, like the wife of Zeus and the goddess of good marriage and of supposedly the happy home to an extent, and female power to another extent. And so it makes sense that that this would be a time of pagan marriage. If you're not familiar with hand fasting as a rite, generally, and it's practiced very differently from different communities and kind of traditions, but on the whole, it's a marriage that lasts a year, and sometimes a year and a day, sometimes even a year and a week. A year and a day is the classic. And this is the idea that, you know, do I want to pledge myself in a strange fealty to someone forever? Well, don't know. Let's have fun for now and see where we stand in a year. And then let's see about, this is the original like vow renewal, right? And I kind of like this idea of you know, how can we promise what something's going to be like before we know what it's like? You know, we can promise to turn up and try and see, and what's realer, the promise you make once and then have to stick to forever, or the promise that you renew every year, you know? So I think there's opportunity to celebrate love and to celebrate not just a deal you made that you have to keep, but rather a deal that you keep wanting to make. You know, I think these are all the kind of things that come up with hand fasting. The Midsommar also has a bunch of stuff in pagan and neo-pagan circles around the battle of the light and the dark, right? That light and dark aren't just in balance here, but they are at war, and it's a dynamic balance. That the Holly King and the Oak King are fighting. The Oak King isn't just like graciously leaving and deciding to go on sabbatical to the circumpolar stars. It is being kicked out or being forced out or battled out. This battle rages back and forth continuously. Okay. As a result, we see a lot of emphasis on this interplay between the holly and the oak. We also see for other kinds of things that happen now, that can happen at other times of year as well, but we see a lot traditionally now, is besom making, is making the ritual broom, again, for sweeping out the ill, right? So every season has its different kinds of cleansings, protections, purifications, and so on. For many people at Midsommar, it is, and for many pagans, it is making anew, crafting the besom or broom, or re-bristling it, or putting a new handle on it, or otherwise sprucing it up in some way, or blessing it, or consecrating it, or asperging or fumigating it, or otherwise making it nice again, so that you can keep sweeping out all those little frustrating things underfoot, you know, so you can keep going with the light and the joy of that light. So the light of summer itself is one of the translations for the Druidic name for this season, which also just gets called midsummer a lot of the time, honestly. But if you wanted to be fancy, you could call it Albenhefen, right? The light of summer, or the light of the shore to many Druids as well. It's translated a little more poetically. It's often regarded by the Druids I've met and been kind enough to be invited into circle with as a festival, yes, of the midsummer and of enjoying the summer sun and cavorting in fields and so on, but also about balance and about that point of reflection on preparing for dying and rebirth again, right? It is precisely at this point of like the middle age of the sun that we now start to think about, like, you know, sorting a will out, right? And not in a morbid way, but because we currently have the strength to work out how to organize our affairs for when we don't have the strength anymore, right? And so there's some big aging mysteries going on with this stuff. The sun is generally regarded as the god of the golden blessings here, and is like very much tied to, in this kind of duotheism that some Druidry shares with an awful lot of Wicca, this idea of the god being, in this case, the sun, and having this sense of the creative spirit, both in terms of generative, a sense of like the sun being fertile at this time and being ready to like make new life and be a father again, as well as a more general creative spirit of enjoying the light that you have and being able to make things and express oneself, whether that's through dance or art or wood carving or what have you. In contrast, the consort, as the consort of the goddess, the god is paired here with nature herself, and nature specifically as a goddess of sweetness in this context. And while the sun is talked about as fertile, the lady is talked about as pleasured, as her desire reaching a peak of her being a liberated sexual entity who is enjoying her embodiment and her carnality, right? These are some very sex positive angles that many pagan groups like to take about, you know, speaking of a goddess as not just a baby factory, right? And really, most of the rituals I've attended have been about understanding and celebrating summer as a balance of optimisms, of the kinds of things that it's easier to have a sunny disposition about when it's nice out, and gratitudes of acknowledging the goodnesses we've already had, and of the good times that we should be grateful for because they don't last, right? The endings that remind us of the sweetness of the beginnings and the middles. Midsummer is also one of the three big nights or Sabbats of the year, referred to as the big spirit nights, along with Beltaine, which just had May Day, and indeed Samhain, or Halloween, or All Souls, if you prefer, the hallowed Eve, right? So this is a time when we have fairies, the wild hunt, and the dead very active in the world, especially in the night, right? And so, along with a bunch of like spiritual considerations of time and aging and balance and desire and the body and sweetness and bringing lights up hills and things like that, we also have this sense of a real like definite magical sense of not just spiritual but spirit working approaches at this time of year. But again, that can look like whatever you want it to, it really can, but very frequently it looks like making garlands and wearing them, processing up hills specifically, so you can, potentially roll a burning wheel of sun down one. Bonfires, again, dancing about, and both dancing in circles and also dancing in serpentine processions as well. We find those very commonly in these kinds of rites and celebrations of this year. So if you were looking, if you don't know of one coming up, why not make one up yourself? Why not have some friends over and cavort around the garden? Why not? So a poem literally called Summer Solstice seems very apt at this point when we're talking about this kind of thing. And I kind of want to bring us home now to consider just one little thing we might do, as well as, a consideration of the allowance of the heaviness of time about all this, right? Just because it's light and sunny doesn't mean it isn't also heavy. I mean, I don't mean that I kind of do mean that in a hippie sense of like, these are profound mysteries, right? And there can be a heaviness of time associated with that, an agedness to it, a vulnerability, a venerability as well, right? But yeah, I think maybe we let this say what it's going to say, right? This was the time when the whole world measured time, and when the light would turn around. This is where the past would come undone, and the spinning earth will mark a new beginning. Let's go back in time to when it all began, to the breaking of new dawns, where moments bright with fire would light the chanting song, where pagans worshipped the sun and danced among the trees, wore strange masks of covered straw, and blessed cold ash with awe. Wreaths hung upon the door against all spirits dire, and when the winter's grasp let go, the sun reversed the pyre. This was when the whole world measured time. This is when the light would turn around, so that spring arrives and seeds will sprout and grow. O radiant sun, stretch the day, shorten night, return earth's darkness into light. This is where the light will turn around, and this is where the past has come undone. So that's a heavy one, right? A little bit, I think. That sense of not just celebrating this continuousness of these traditions, but of what we lose, what's sundered in that process of the diaspora of time itself. And those should be considered and pondered on, I think. I think those are important lessons that we can draw from this, as well as how much fun it is to run around in the sun and to make sure that we wear suntan lotion for those of us who burn easily. But I wanted to leave you with one particular activity, as we always do in these kinds of talks. And this one, very straightforward. Eat some sweets in the sun, right? Bake something sweet, or get someone you know to bake something sweet, especially using honey, and because honey is the candy of the sun, and I mean this quite sincerely, right? Not only is it golden colored, honey is the product of bees that work very hard, that gather from a whole bouquet of different flowers and gather those pollens. Many people don't realize that honey is flavored by the things that the bees have been eating. In areas where a lot of rosemary grows, the honey takes on a rosemary taste, right? The pollen makes a difference. And so if the bees are feeding on all sorts of different flowers, they are drawing from a wide variety of sources. And so, speaking of like astrological herbalism, planetarily speaking, honey can be thought to be accorded to every planet, whether you're doing the work of Jupiter to expand your business, or Venus to heal your heart from an old bad relationship, right? Or Mercury work for eloquence. Honey can capture that memory in the light of flowers of any of the flowers of any of the planets, right? That all 7 of the planets can be worked through honey. All right. Now there is also a particular Venusian sweetness when it's worked with Venusian flowers particularly, but I would say that the honey in its incorruptibility, in the sense that you can keep honey for a very long time and it might go a bit crusty, but it won't spoil. Fundamentally, you can still crack it and use it for delicious things. It will still do what it's meant to do. It will still bring that sweetness of life and of light to you. As such, yeah, making food with having sweet things, especially honey, maybe decorating them in solar ways with yellows and these bright blooming yellows and oranges and whites. Yeah, this is a beautiful thing for me, and I think a profound set of mysteries, precisely because it's not going to be hot forever. It's not going to be sweet forever. So we should enjoy it now while we can. And the other part I would say about this very arcane rite is that you should eat sweets outside. You should rejoice with the source of that sweetness, with the sun that has helped those flowers grow, that has formed the basis of a food chain that allows various plants and animals and bees and us to all eat together, in the commonwealth under the sun, right? And so I would say, if you were looking for if you were like, I can't get hold of any St. John's wort, I don't know of any ferns, I can't get St. John's day off, I have to work, what maybe you can do if you have 5 minutes is maybe find a honey cake of some kind, maybe find a nice recipe online, maybe get a friend to make them, apply them with mead or something honeyed as well, or maybe just go and buy some honey and smother and slather some kind of cupcake or something with it, and then eat that outside and get sticky and enjoy the treacliness of it, the sweetness of it, and the way that this too shall pass, and that can be a way to enjoy the delights of summer more, whether that's dancing around a campfire, or dancing to crazy music outside, or making music in the sun, or reading poems to your nearest and dearest, whatever that, or just having a doze in the shade, whatever that looks like for you. I hope you get to enjoy this season. I hope you get to have a sense of the various sweetnesses of this period of time. If you're looking for further study in the sun, if you want to read a book in the shade as well, I would recommend 2 works to you. The first is The Stations of the Sun by Ronald Hutton. It's a history of the ritual year in Britain primarily, but it also has a bunch of stuff about how these British traditions have found their way into America and been influenced by American currents as well. And the other one I would recommend is Stephen Wilson's The Magical Universe, Everyday Ritual and Magic in Pre-Modern Europe, which is actually arranged mostly by life cycle. So it starts with like all the kinds of folklore around what people did around pregnancies and births, and then goes through like christenings and things like that, to like middle-age stuff, to marriage, to having kids yourself, to death to funerary celebrations and things like that. But in the course of it, it ranges all over Europe and gives you all sorts of things that people did at Midsommar and at various other points of the year, of other celebrations or festivals of the turn of time and the wheel of the year. So I would recommend both of these texts for a far deeper historical grounding than the very broad overview I've given you here today. And I hope you find something great to read and enjoy in the sun. I'll leave you with this final piece. Again, a bit of a heavier one, and so I wanted to give you a nice, like, this kind of Miami sunset thing going on here. Again, not just the full sun, but the sun is setting, the sun is leaving, the sun is like one last thing as I wave goodbye. Suppose for a moment you live in a land amazed at what happens during summer solstice. Very strange things begin to occur. Instantly, there is little darkness. Night that we are so used to, gone. What is left is the brilliant colors. Daylight, from dusk to dawn to dusk again. A light in all its energy and brightness. Yes, we are north of the 60th parallel, land of the midnight sun. I have been here before and seen things, gazed upon the horizon, waiting for darkness to reappear, holding on to summer in all its life, love, and beauty. To see it ebb once more as daylight fades to night. May you find a time in the light. May you understand the tides of darkness as they push and lap at the edges of things. May you ensure that you have gathered the necessary medicines for the year. May you hold hands with those you care about around something warming. Thank you all very much.